The estate sale was a vulture's feast, a sad, picked-over carcass of a life half-lived. Julian, a musician with a collector's heart and an artist's empty wallet, navigated the cramped rooms of the suburban house, sidestepping dusty furniture and boxes of yellowed paperbacks. He was hunting for vintage audio equipment, the forgotten relics of an analog age that, to his ears, still held a warmth and soul that digital could never replicate. Tucked away in a damp, wood-paneled basement, he found his prize. It was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, but unlike any he'd ever seen. It was sleek, brutally minimalist, and built like a piece of scientific apparatus. A small, elegant plaque on its brushed aluminum face read, Somnus 7. It was heavy, cold to the touch, and exuded an aura of profound seriousness. Threaded onto its spindles was a single, 7-inch reel of black magnetic tape, unlabeled and pristine. The seller, the deceased's harried nephew, just wanted the basement cleared. That old thing? My uncle was an audio engineer, a recluse. Barely spoke a word the last 20 years, he said, waving a dismissive hand. 50 quid and it's yours. He called it his echo chamber. Julian paid the man without haggling and wrestled the Somnus 7 into the back of his car. Back in his small, sound-treated studio apartment, he cleaned the machine with reverence. The controls were unusual, no standard EQ, just knobs labeled resonance, decay, and imprint. He plugged it in. A single, soft, amber light glowed to life. With a sense of mounting excitement, he hit play. He expected music, or perhaps a forgotten conversation. Instead, he got silence. Not true silence, but the deep, textured quiet of an empty, soundproofed room. He cranked the volume on his mixing board, his expensive studio monitors humming. There, at the very edge of audibility, was something else. A faint, sibilant hiss, like breath on a cold window pane, and beneath that, whispers. They were layered, indistinct, a ghostly chorus of murmurs, too faint to be deciphered. It was unsettling, but Julian, the audio enthusiast, was fascinated. It was like listening to the ghost of a sound. After letting the entire reel play its course of near silence, he decided to test the machine's recording capabilities. He threaded a fresh reel of tape, plugged in his vintage Telecaster, and played a simple melancholic chord progression. The VU meters on the Somnus 7 barely twitched, but the amber imprint light pulsed in time with his playing, slow and rhythmic, like a mechanical heartbeat. He rewound the tape and played it back. His guitar sounded magnificent, rich, warm, and imbued with an incredible sense of space. But then he heard something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Underneath his guitar chord, clear as day, was the distinct sound of a floorboard creaking in the room behind. He ripped his headphones off, his heart hammering. He spun around in his chair. The room was empty. He was alone, as he always was when he worked. He lived on the top floor. No one was above him. He scrubbed the tape back and listened again. There it was, a gentle wooden groan. It wasn't on any of his other microphones. It was embedded in the recording itself, as if the Somnus 7 had a microphone of its own, one that heard things his ears and his professional equipment could not. A thrill of fear and morbid curiosity shot through him. The seller's words echoed in his mind, his echo chamber. Over the next few days, Julian became obsessed. He abandoned the music he was supposed to be composing and dedicated himself to experimenting with the Somnus 7. Every recording yielded a new anomaly. He'd record a vocal track, and on playback, he'd hear a faint, sighing breath that wasn't his own. He'd record a drum machine pattern in a perfectly silent room, and the playback would contain the sound of a distant door clicking shut. These were not random noises. They were quiet, intimate, domestic sounds. The sounds of a house being lived in, the sounds of a ghost. He went back to the original tape, the one that came with the machine. Using his audio restoration software, he spent hours isolating and amplifying the faint whispers. They began to resolve into fragments of speech. "Shouldn't have built it," said a man's voice, tired and afraid. "It doesn't forget," whispered another. "Listening, it's always listening." Julian felt a profound sense of unease. He was listening to conversations that had been soaked up by the silence of a room years ago. The machine wasn't just recording sound, it was recording the memory of sound. His online research into the Somnus 7 yielded little. It was an obscure, almost mythical piece of equipment. He found only a handful of mentions in defunct audio engineering forums. The consensus was that it was an experimental prototype, built in the late 1970s by a reclusive genius named Alias Vance. Vance had been obsessed with a fringe theory: residual acoustics. He believed that spaces retained the sonic imprint of significant events, that powerful emotions could leave a permanent stain on the acoustic environment. The Somnus 7 was his attempt to build a device sensitive enough to capture these sonic ghosts. According to the forum posts, Vance had succeeded too well. He had vanished without a trace in the early 80s, leaving behind only his soundproofed home studio and his strange machines. Julian was sitting in his own studio, listening to a recording made in Elias Vance's. The phenomenon began to change. The added sounds became more personal, more invasive. One night, while recording a keyboard melody, he heard a new sound on the playback. It was a whisper, right next to the microphone, and it whispered his name. Julian. He threw the headphones down, a strangled cry escaping his lips. The room felt suddenly cold, violated. The line between fascinating experiment and outright horror had been crossed. The machine wasn't just picking up the echoes of Elias Vance's long-dead studio anymore. It was picking up echoes from his reality, or creating them. He tried to unplug it, to put it away, but he couldn't. The mystery was a hook in his soul. He had to understand. The next stage of the machine's evolution was even more terrifying. It began to remove things. He spent an entire afternoon recording a complex, beautiful guitar solo he had finally perfected. It was flawless. He listened back, his heart swelling with pride. But when the solo section arrived, a crucial, soaring note was simply gone. In its place was a pocket of cold, dead silence, followed by the faint, mocking sound of a woman humming. He recorded it again. This time, a different part of the solo was erased, replaced by the sound of a teaspoon stirring a porcelain cup. The machine wasn't just adding echoes anymore, it was feeding on his music, replacing his creation with its own ghostly artifacts. It was editing his sound, rewriting his work, asserting its own quiet, insidious will. His studio, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage he shared with an unseen, sound-eating entity. Sleep became a luxury. He was haunted by the whispers from the machine, the sounds of a life he'd never lived. He began to hear them even when the machine was off, a creak on the stairs outside his apartment, a sigh from the empty armchair in the corner. He was becoming attuned to the residual acoustics of his own life, his mind rewired by the Somnus 7. Finally, he decided he'd had enough. The machine had to go. He unplugged it, intending to take it to the scrapyard, to smash it to pieces. But as his fingers touched the cold metal, the amber light on the front panel flickered on. The machine wasn't plugged into the wall. With a low mechanical whir, the reels began to turn. The original tape, Vance's tape, was threaded on the spindles. The sound that filled the studio was no longer whispering. It was a cacophony. The layered voices of years, all speaking at once, a torrent of phantom conversations, arguments, cries, and laughter. The sound became physical. A recorded crash of breaking glass from the tape was answered by a spiderweb of cracks erupting across his studio window. A frantic, desperate pounding on a door in the recording was matched by a violent, shuddering blow against his own apartment door, making the frame splinter. The Somnus 7 was no longer just recording echoes, it was projecting them. It was turning his studio into Vance's, replaying the acoustic history of that haunted room and making it real. Julian backed away, cornered, his body trembling with abject terror. He was trapped inside the recording. Then, through the chaos, a new sound emerged from the speakers, silencing all the others. It was the voice of Elias Vance, clear and terrified. "It's in the silence," He screamed, his voice raw with panic. It's not the sounds, it's the silence in between. That's where it lives. That's what it... Vance's scream was cut short, swallowed by a sound that was not a sound. It was a deep guttural hum, a wave of pure static that felt like the sonic equivalent of a black hole, absorbing all light, all warmth, all noise. It was the sound of absolute emptiness, a profound and terrifying negation of existence. And in that moment, Julian understood. Vance hadn't built a machine to record ghosts. He had built a chamber to contain something that lived in the silence, something that fed on sound, on memory, on life itself. And after decades of dormancy, it was awake. And it was hungry. The machine fell silent. The amber light faded. Julian stood in the ringing quiet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It was over. He took a step, then another. He reached for the doorknob, his hand shaking. He had to get out. He had to run. He turned the knob. It didn't budge. He pulled harder. The door was sealed shut, as if welded to the frame. The window, though cracked, was unbreakable. He was trapped. He turned back to the Somnus 7. The amber light flickered on again, soft and patient. With a gentle click, the machine switched to imprint mode. It was ready to record. Julian opened his mouth to scream. And from the speakers, a new sound played back into the room. It was faint, terrified, and utterly familiar. It was the sound of his own silent, screaming breath. A new echo, added to the collection. A new layer, woven into the fabric of the machine's long and hungry silence. He had become the ghost, his terror just another whisper on an endless reel of tape, waiting for the next listener to press play.